Good morning, Glendale. This is Pastor Chris Duckworth with our weekly Tuesday podcast. Today I'm talking about going back to school, getting ready. Proverbs 22:6 says, "Train up a child in the way they should go. Even when they are old, they will not depart from it." Deuteronomy chapter 6, verses 5 through 9, talking about loving the Lord your God with all your heart, your soul, and your strength. Take to heart these words that God has given you. Repeat them to your children. Talk about them when you're at home or away, when you lie down and when you get up. Write them down. Tie them around your wrist. Wear them as a headband as a reminder. Write them on the door frames of your house and on your gates. In the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus said in chapter 19, verse 14, "Let the little children come to me, and do not hinder them, for the kingdom of heaven belongs to such as these." And in 1 Timothy 4, verses 10 and 11, Paul writes to Timothy, his young friend, "This is why we work hard and continue to struggle, for our hope is in the living God, who is the Savior of all people, and particularly of all believers. Teach these things and insist that everyone learns them." So this podcast is not just for parents, it's for grandparents, great-grandparents, aunts, and uncles, for all of us. Are you preparing for back to school in some way? As parents, we're watching the county's decisions, maybe our individual school decisions about how and what to do. We may be watching for the governor's declaration to decide whether we will or won't. We don't know what it's going to look like exactly. Maybe we haven't made our choices yet. As grandparents and great-grandparents, maybe our grandchildren are getting ready to go back to school. Are we doing anything to help encourage and support them? As aunts and uncles, we can still have a time to pray for our family's children. All of us as a church should be praying for our schools, our school leaders and teachers and staff, and students and families as they prepare for whatever it might look like. So what things are you doing to prepare for back to school? Not knowing exactly how it's going to be. There's certain preparations that we make every school year, getting back into a routine at some point, purchasing of supplies. The supply lists are out now in some schools. Maybe we're having consultations, participating in forums and so on, so the decisions can be made. Maybe we're having to consider whether we're going to homeschool. Not everyone is able to do that financially or for other reasons. Are we also preparing our children spiritually, though, to go back to school, to maintain, to continue their daily walk with God in the midst of the new now as we prepare for school under COVID-19? If we don't teach our children to follow Christ, the world will teach them not to. Who do we want our children to follow? Who do we want them to have as an example always before them? Children are great imitators, so we need to give them something to imitate. As parents, as grandparents, as aunts and uncles, as members of a community, are we imitating? Are we offering faith and hope and trust, love and kindness and generosity, worshiping and peacemaking and tithing, being content, being adaptable to the ever-changing world around us? Are we being an example that they can imitate in these things? We teach them by the way we conduct ourselves, so we are called upon to be good role models. On Sunday, as part of the sermon, I asked if anyone wanted to preach the message, to give the sermon. No one did. None of the adults wanted to either. We are to preach the gospel, the good news, not always by word, but sometimes by our actions and our interactions. The Bible tells us over and over and over again, we preach the gospel by loving one another, being at peace with one another, living in harmony, being concerned for each other, helping each other, encouraging each other, forgiving each other, by building each other up, praying for each other, helping each other love and do the right thing, doing good deeds for one another, and by not passing judgment, lying, slandering, or even grumbling against each other. Are we good examples to imitate in these things for our children, our grandchildren, our nieces and nephews, our brothers and sisters in our church family, and as members of our community? Here are some practical suggestions that you might talk about with your kids or your grandkids or your nieces and nephews. Ask them what questions they have about their faith, what parts they don't understand. Search for the answers together, demonstrating, modeling, not just Bible reading, but Bible study, figuring out what it means, what it is saying to us. Model and so that they can imitate you being committed to continually deepening your understanding of Christianity, of the Bible, of your relationship with God and Christ, of the work of God in your life, and help them to see that in their lives. Intentionally making time and space for each and every day in your individual life and activities, in the midst of your home, what it looks like to be in a relationship with God. Intentionally set a time and a place where they see you spending time with God. Model prayer for them so that they can imitate that. Read the Bible together, study the Bible together, pray together. Model these things so that they can learn it and apply it in their lives. In the newsletter this week, there will be some other practical information about back to school and some links to some articles that I've read that might be helpful in certain situations. All of us can certainly pray for one another, pray for families who have children getting ready to go back to school, our school systems as they prepare, our communities as they prepare. We can all encourage those around us, not just our family members, but we can encourage others in our community that we have contact with as we see them in grocery stores and Walmarts and so on, restaurants, wherever it might be. And we can all support one another in some way as everyone prepares for going back to school, whatever it might look like. Philippians chapter 4 tells us, do not be anxious about anything, but in everything by prayer and petition with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. And the peace of God, which passes all understanding, will guard your hearts and minds in Jesus. Is that true for your life, and are you allowing your kids to see that in your life? Arm yourself and arm them with the Spirit. Put on the full armor of God, Ephesians tells us, so that you can take your stand against the devil's schemes. Put on the spiritual armor of God so that in the midst of struggles and temptations, you have a place to stand and defend yourself using the tools that God has given you. Model this in your life and teach your children as well. They may not fully understand, but they surely can see how it is at work in your life. So give your children something to imitate, to put into practice, and practice with them. Peace and blessings. And may God bless your school year.